Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. As much as I would like to concentrate more on putting out game reviews and getting to work at the task at hand of doing everything I can to grow my channel even more than it already has, I had to take a little time to stop, put the games aside, and sit down to talk with everyone about some topics that have been raised over the recent days. Through Twitter, video comments, and direct emails, I've been contacted by numerous indie developers that have expressed their own support, concerns, and questions. And given the body of some of those questions, I thought it would behoove me to have the community present to answer these questions for everyone publicly, as they all seem to follow along a similar theme. And I think raising awareness about this is every bit as important as raising awareness about a DMCA strike on a YouTuber. But before we get started, I would like to remind any indie developers that might be listening to this that I'm just a normal person. I make no claim to a higher wisdom or knowledge, and the vast majority of what I say in my videos are derived from my own opinion after being filtered through my own moral compass and ethical standards as a consumer. Of course, I completely understand that every indie developer, every project, every situation is going to be entirely and singularly unique to some degree or another. So please take everything I'm about to say in that light and try not to read too much into any of it, as it may not apply to your specific situation. All this is one gamer's opinion, nothing more and nothing less. So, given the recent public issues surrounding companies like Digital Homicide, Dentola Studios, and the For Fun game controversy that is currently brewing, and for the record, yes, I am very aware of the controversy surrounding them, and I'm currently pondering the implications if I report on them and then suffer a second DMCA strike. But given those recent controversies, several indie developers have expressed some very legitimate concerns to me in regards to how the public will continue to perceive indie developers moving forward, and all things considered, this seemed like a very real concern. Now, in the festering cesspool that Steam Greenlight has become, asset flippers, vote botters, and morally bankrupt money-grubbing entities run rampant and seem to be on the verge of taking the Greenlight system over completely, and in the midst of it all, it could be very easy for one to become jaded against indie developers at even a subconscious level based upon the sheer amount of fecund waste that one must wade through in order to locate a passable game. And this unfortunate but ultimately inevitable occurrence might very well have resulted on a shift in perception for at least some individuals in regards to indie developers as a whole. And you see, these developers are concerned, and rightfully so. In the current environment, it would be very easy for a promising indie developer to get steamrolled by a negative tidal wave created by a simple association alone. Now, we have gone over what an asset flipper is in the past, and it should be fairly common sense for most of us to disassociate developers from asset flippers, but for some, it may not always be the case. You have to remember that most indie developers are operating on a shoestring budget with nothing more than hopes, dreams, an idea for a game, and a little bit of talent. In many ways, an indie developer is not unlike a small YouTube channel, struggling to rise out of the murky depths of obscurity amongst the thousands of others attempting to produce similar content to their own. Very few ever manage to turn a profit, and even fewer still manage to turn their passion into a career. And for this, I have a great deal of sympathy for the legitimate indie devs out there in the world. Unfortunately, these indie devs out there have indeed gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to recognition on the Steam storefront, and especially the Steam Greenlight system itself. For them, it is a constant battle for recognition and acceptance within an area that is overcome with amoral behaviors on the part of asset flippers who drown out legitimate games by their never-ending cavalcade of vote botting and keys for votes shite. But it is important for us to sometimes remind ourselves that the vast majority of legitimate indie developers out there are very much average people with a passion and a dream, and they deserve as much support as your average YouTuber. For many, theirs is very much a labor of love, and it would be a travesty to see a good game by an honest person buried under the weight of shitehawk asset flippers like Dentola Studios. Another of the more common questions I've been receiving in the past few days is in regards to posting games on Steam to begin with. And it seems many indie devs are unsure if they're ready, and this is actually a bit more of a complicated question than one might think. In response to this, I'd have to actually ask a question in return. Now, asking because the idea of receiving money for something you created excites you, or because you honestly feel you're ready to take your game or games to the professional level. And before you start thinking, oh, he's a Steam purist, no, I'm actually not. I don't hold Steam up to some gold standard or some such. Far from it. In fact, Steam has the absolute worst consumer support I've ever seen from a digital distribution storefront, and I decry their support loudly and often, as I do many other business practices that Valve has incorporated. And to me, a storefront is a storefront is a storefront. It holds no special meaning to me other than that. Steam just happens to be the biggest one. Now, I ask this question in regards to any of the distribution platforms because you have to think about this. The moment you post your game onto a site like Steam or GOG, you're entering the professional domain, and your game will be judged under a very large microscope. It's even possible that my eyes may come across your game, and no matter if I've conversed with you or not, or even if I like you, I will merely divulge that fact prior to performing the review, and if it is good, I will say so. If it is bad, I can and will tear it to shreds and leave the broken, bloodied corpse in the alley to be picked over by sewer rats. Because when it comes to protecting my viewers from a substandard product, I hold no favorites. So you have to ask yourself if you, and more importantly your game, is ready for that type of situation. If you are, then go right ahead. If you're not sure, then maybe hold off. There are sites like Newgrounds and itch.io that specialize and focus in newer indie developers and titles that you can use as sort of a professional barometer on whether or not your game will be well received in a more professional market. I had also intended on separating out the question about whether or not to charge money for your game completely, but the vast majority of the answer to that question matches whether or not the game should be posted on Steam with one addendum. Now, if you feel your game is ready for a larger and more professional market, you may still feel reluctant to charge money, and there is, realistically, nothing wrong with that as long as you're capable of supporting yourself in the meantime. Now, I've reviewed a few free games on Steam in recent months that I was genuinely puzzled that the developers weren't asking for any form of compensation as they were quite good. But it's also easy to forget that these developers do earn a certain amount of goodwill by posting these games as free, and that will usually end up with an increased footprint and visibility when it comes time for them to post their second game. Of course, that is a double-edged sword in itself as well, because if the game you're charging people for isn't up to the standards set by the free title, then there's a good number of people who will eviscerate you for it, so you do have to take that into consideration. So, ladies and gentlemen, please do try to remember that just because there are some companies like Digital Homicide and Dentola Studios out there, that they're a very vocal and disgusting minority when it comes to the indie game development scene. Most indie devs are just like us and are battling issues with asset flippers as much as we are, if not more so. Now, I know that for most people, none of this really needed to be said, but I felt I had to say it anyways because I do respect indie developers and the amount of work they do and the amount of grief they undergo. It's not easy, but they soldier through in order to provide us with the fruits of their labor for our enjoyment and entertainment. And that takes a very rare and special type of person to be able to do that, and they do very much have my respect, even if I happen to come across one of their games and tear it to shreds. I do it not out of disgust or hatred, but out of protection for the consumer. Because a bad game is still a bad game at the end of the day, no matter how much I respect the developer. So maybe, just this once, show them a little bit of your respect as well, and drop a note for them in the comments section down below. I know some of them might take heart from some words of encouragement from their consumers. And while you're at it, don't forget to drop a like and share on this video. If you're new to the channel, please do remember to hit that subscribe button. It does help out much more than you might realize. Also, if you feel like supporting the channel even further, I do have a Patreon as well. The link for that is in the description down below. Remember, at the time of this video is posted, I have not revamped the Patreon page yet. That will happen the following weekend. So if you're viewing this after the 27th, you should be fine. Thank you very much for watching as I tended to ramble on endlessly here. I know for some it may not seem important, but for others it could very much mean a great deal. Once again, I am SidAlpha, and I will see you next time.